Hi, welcome to today's presentation where we'll be discussing SAP HANA input parameters and variables and how they can be leveraged with IBM Cognos BI. First, let's start with a brief explanation of each. An SAP HANA variable is basically very similar to an SAP BW variable. In essence, they're just really imposed filters applied at runtime when a particular user will execute reports. The variables can have a number of properties. They can be made mandatory, they can be made optional, multi, or single select. An example of this could be a user presented with a drop-down prompt control to choose a particular fiscal period or a cost center, etc. And the output returned from this will be filtered based on the selected item. In contrast, SAP HANA input parameters are really meant to take an input from a user at runtime, which will then be used within HANA to return and possibly manipulate the results based on the selected criteria. So an example of this could be presenting the user with a type-in prompt where they could input an exchange rate, and at runtime, a key figure defined in SAP HANA Studio would dynamically be computed based on the user entry. Other things to note is that an SAP variable at the end of the day really only affects a SQL where clause being sent down to SAP. There's no vendor-specific syntax, and it should be noted that while they can be made mandatory, the SQL from SAP will not enforce that mandatory property. SAP input parameters, however, do require some vendor-specific SQL syntax, and I encourage you to go and look at SAP's documentation to find out more on this. And it should also be noted that the SQL from SAP will also enforce the mandatory property. So why don't we just dive in and show how we can go and take advantage of these two capabilities with IBM Cognos BI. Okay, so within Framework Manager, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go and import two views. One view will contain an SAP HANA input parameter, and the other view will contain an SAP HANA variable. So using the wizard, we're just going to go and select the data source, which is our HANA server. All the analytic and calculation views are always contained within the sysbic schema, so we're going to expand that and look at the views. The first view that I'm going to be bringing in is Greatout sales, which contains my input parameter. And here we'll also bring in the GOSALES view, which contains the SAP variable. We'll be importing those into Framework Manager. All the objects are brought in. However, the one thing that we can't decipher out of here is, do they actually contain variables and or input parameter? Unfortunately, these properties are not available when querying the objects directly. So the user will either have to be knowledgeable about those particular objects and know all the properties. However, it is feasible to go and fetch this information directly from HANA from different views and different tables. I've created a package for this purpose. So as you build new objects within HANA Studio, whether it be views, parameters, changing the names of columns, all this information is stored in a number of different views and tables in HANA itself. So if I was to demonstrate where these are located, again, I'm just going to go and use the wizard, point to our HANA data source. All this information is stored under the sysbic schema. And there's a number of tables there that are all prefixed with BIMC, as well as a number of views which are also prefixed with BIMC, which are available to the users to go and query and to get more information about what's contained within those views. In this particular model, I've already imported them, and the two that I'll be using today is the BIMC variable and BIMC variable assignment. And I've joined both of them for the purpose of creating one single report to go and find this information. I've joined both of them on catalog name and cube name. So why don't we go now to Report Studio to go and fetch some of this information from these particular views. So we've opened up Report Studio against the View Information package, and the purpose of this exercise is to go and find out a little bit more information about the imported views and to really find out, are there any variables, are there any input parameters that are defined against them, and what are their properties. So here for this, we're going to be using these two particular views that we've just imported from HANA. Here I'll be interested in the catalog name, the cube name, clearly the variable name, and here whether they are a single or multi-select, as well as if it's a mandatory or not property. From the other view, what we're going to be bringing in is simply the model element name, which really defines which attribute a variable could be defined against, and the placeholder name. Only import parameters will have placeholder names. Therefore, it's important to identify, is the particular variable, is it really truly a variable, or is it an input parameter? And this field will show us that. To narrow down the number of views that we're going to see here, we're going to be creating a quick prompt control on catalog name. And we'll do the same thing for cube name. The only difference here is for the cube name, we're going to be creating a cascading prompt to only show the cubes that belong to a particular catalog, selected catalogs. Click OK. Now we're ready to execute the report. Run the report. I know that one of the views came from the gosalesdmr catalog and the other one came from the Greatout, so I select those two. Click on the next button, and now obviously we only have those two particular views. Those are the ones that we brought in, and that's what we're interested in, and we'll click on the finish button. Quickly here we can see that indeed we do have a variable defined for the GOSALES view that we've brought in. It is a multi-select and it is not mandatory. It is defined against the product line EN attribute. And there's no placeholder name, meaning this is indeed a variable and not an input parameter. Same thing here, we do have against the Greatout, against the sales view that we've imported, we do have the variable name here, ParamProdLine. It is not multi-line and it is not mandatory. Here the model element name is unimportant for this exercise, but what's important here is we are able to identify that this is indeed an input parameter, and this name will be used later on for the syntax that we need to input into Framework Manager. So let's move there now. Okay, so now within Framework Manager we want to go and make some changes to our imported objects to really reflect the fact that they have either variables and or input parameters. So we'll start with the Greatout door sales. So we know here from Greatout doors I've superimposed the results of our previous report just to really help us here in understanding what needs to be done. For the Greatout sales, we know that we have a placeholder, which means we have an input parameter, and we need to go and modify the query subject to reflect this. So why don't we start there first. I'm going to go and edit the definition of Greatout door sales. And the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to be modifying the SQL, basically to tag on the vendor-specific SQL. So first thing is we need to indicate that to Framework Manager. We're going to go to the Query Information tab. On the bottom right-hand corner, we're going to select Options, go to the SQL Setting tabs, and select this as Native SQL. Basically, this is going to be HANA-specific SQL. Send it down. Select OK, click OK. And now, because we're going to be changing the SQL, I'm just going to be pasting the value here. Basically now we're going to be changing from the original by default SQL that we had to select star from sysbic Greatout sales, and you have here at the end from placeholder the specific syntax that's required by SAP. So here we're just going to be saying placeholder equals ParamProdLine, which is the name of the parameter, comma. Now here we would have the option of either placing the value. It requires right now a string value. We could either input the values directly here, or we've included here a prompt macro, which is this portion here, which basically now just going to prompt the user for information at runtime in order to input the variables. Here in this case, I've just named it yes or no. It's just expecting a particular value of it. I've indicated that this is a string, as well as the default value will be yes. And this is all that's really required for input parameters. There are some other options that we're going to do with variables that really extends what we need to do. Click on OK, and the query subject is updated. Okay, so now we need to move on to the second view, which contains the SAP HANA variable. Again, here I've superimposed the results from a report that we ran earlier. Here, for this particular view, with the GOSALES view, we know we have a variable defined as var product line en. It is a multi-select, and as well it is not mandatory, and we need to fetch the information from the product line en attribute. So let's move there now. First thing we need to do is for the prompt control, we're going to be creating a quick query subject. PL. Here we're going to be selecting, again, the values from our HANA data source. And we can go directly against the exact same query. From the GOSALES. And the field we'll need is product line EN because we're going to be prompting the user on that particular attribute. So we bring this in. The next step we do now, we need to go and indicate to that particular query subject that whenever anybody picks any field from this particular view, they need to be prompted on product line EN. So let's modify this. We don't need to go and specify or change the SQL itself. All we need to do is go to the filter tab. I'm going to click on Add. Here what I've defined is basically saying, in my expression, is saying HANA GOSALES product line EN in because of course this is a multi-select, and I've used the prompt macro with prompt many. I've named it line. It is a string value that's expected. I've used here a default value of yes, which is not really required, and the information is going to be populated, or the drop down box is going to be populated from hana.pl.productLineEn, which is what I had defined right here. We can select OK. Here for the usage, because we know in this particular case it is an optional variable, what I can do here is select it as optional. This is all that's required to be done. Obviously, if the value would be mandatory, then we just have to indicate that right here as always. As well, if the value had been a single select, we would use the prompt macro and not the prompt many. At this point in time, we're ready to publish our package. So now what we need to do is create a package to publish it. Now let's go see the results in Report Studio. So within Report Studio now, let's demonstrate exactly the changes that we've made inside Framework Manager. The goal of this was really to show that without any intervention, without any work from the user, they will be prompted based on what's defined inside HANA. So let's start with the input parameter. So here we're just simply going to create a very small report, bring in product line, quantity, and I also want to bring in calc column. Calc column is the particular field within HANA that's going to evaluate the user entry for the input parameter and change its value. So now, if I was to execute the report, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to select yes and run the report with that particular entry, and we'll notice here that the values for calc column did not change at all. If I was to run the exact same report a second time, however this time I'm going to indicate no, the value of calc column will change. So this is a very easy way of implementing input parameter and very straightforward. Now let's move on to the variables defined inside the GOSALES view. We're just going to create a brand new list. We're going to bring in product line EN, product type EN, maybe a number of key figures, and just grouping it so that's a little bit easier to see. So now upon running the report, I'm not expecting to have to build some prompt pages in order to bring that functionality. All I need to do now is execute that particular report, and at runtime I will be prompted for the fields. It is a multi-select, so I can select more than one value, and not only that, this particular field happens to be optional. So I can field two values here, select on the OK button, the report will be filtered based on those two fields. If I was to go back to the report again, as I said before, this is an optional variable, so if I was to re-execute the report and not select anything, basically what happens is our report will be now unfiltered and give us the result that we're expecting. So thank you very much for following today's demonstration. Have a good day.